Oh, do you have a Japanese whiskey?
Suntory Times. If you've seen Lost in Translation, you'll understand why that's funny. Hey everyone,
I'm actually drinking.
Welcome to the May. Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Welcome to the May Common Room. You might notice there's only two of us.
Oh, there's our third one on the way.
In his room. But Andrew is kind of snowed under at the moment, so it's just going to be the two of us. And we thought today we would talk a little bit about the Ecumenism Month, which we had last month. But before that, we haven't talked in a while, Matt. How are you?
Well, first, did you hear the two intros that I had to do for Trent Horn and Sister Miriam James? I could not say ecumenism.
Ecumenenenenism. You know what's funny about that? I was on Trent's show, debriefing after some of his debates and stuff. And the second time I said Ecumenism Month, I absolutely butchered it.
It's a hard word because you think of
before a fall.
Well, every time I think of ecumenical, so I'm like ecumenenism is what my brain goes to rather than complete switch of ecumenism. So that's my excuse. But no, good. And I'm wearing my Peloton shirt. So thank you, David. David and Marie just got a Peloton. David's work, I guess, supplies them with a Peloton if they want. And so I gave them my code.
We have an account that we can spend on fitness and what have you. And now that we live in Wisconsin, exercising in the winter is very difficult. So we started turning one of our rooms into a gym. And Marie said that she would feel motivated if she had a Peloton, and her wish is my command. So I got her a Peloton.
I had a family member who had one who didn't end up using it near as much. And so during the pandemic, it was a godsend for me. And I was able to buy it off of them at like half the price of a Peloton. And so anyways, but I got this code. And so I got some free apparel when David got his because I gave him my code. Yeah, but I told Marie actually somewhat, David, you know how you said to me once with the rosary, you're like, normalize at least just a decade. You just have some basic thresholds. There's going to be days where you're really striving to do a rosary a day, but sometimes you just fail. And if you don't allow yourself the grace of sometimes a decade is enough, you'll just do nothing. So I told her with the Peloton, something that's really helped me is normalize the 15-minute workout. So of course you want to try to do a 30-minute one if you can. And some of the really ambitious days, you might do a 45-minute bike ride, but there's times where 15 minutes, it still kicks your butt. I'll tell you what.
Some days just put on your shoes. That's good enough.
Well, that's what The Rock says.
I have my own shoes coming. They should arrive tomorrow, I think. So I'm going to get on the the Peloton bandwagon.
Well, everyone finds their own favorite instructor. And
yes, Marie told me about yours. I think you need some psychotherapy. I think we're going to call in Dr. Freud. Did you tell the people who your favorite instructor is?
I think Marie thinks this for different reasons, but Leanne Hainsby. It was really 3, but let's be honest, the last like 20 rides, it's just been with her. She's a British woman, very cute British woman. And I just enjoy riding to her every time. Her personality is great. And Marie goes, I can't remember exactly how I said it to her in a text message, but I forgot that you're British. And she literally made a joke. Yeah, there's something about them cute British people.
Well, I just think it's wonderful that you naturally feel comfortable taking orders from people from England. And so whether it's on the Peloton or on the podcast, it's the same thing. Yeah,
she's a little easier on the eyes, David. Makes it easier when it comes from someone like that. I'm a little bit more willing.
So if I work out on this Peloton a lot and look good in a crop top, then you'll really start doing what I say. This is good.
That's the
good
answer. To know. But yeah, no, everything's been, go back to original question, busiest stretch of my entire life. Like, definitely. And it's almost done. It was supposed to be done today, but it's, as you know, with programming and coding, you only can have rough estimates. And as you get closer, your variance, your distribution of outcomes narrows. And I really thought it was narrowing to the point where I was going to be done today. I need this done though by Wednesday because I leave on vacation Thursday and I really don't want this in the back of my mind. But it's a project that's been like 4 months and there's probably 10 different moving parts with Python of the code using a bunch of LSTM projection type stuff on data, but then you've got to bring it all together. And to bring it together, when there's a lot of moving parts, it's sometimes hard to keep it track in your head. And so I keep finding myself as I bring it together, getting closer and closer, but then sometimes getting a little bit discombobulated of all of these moving parts right now. And so it just keeps dragging on. And after this, I'll be doing a couple more hours before my cousin's graduation. And then hopefully tomorrow or Tuesday, I will feel very good about the final result of it all coming together. But also, as you know, with like, I know you don't do as much predictive analytics with programming, but there's standard of error to every prediction you make, and you've got to be careful that they're not compounding as you start adding them together. And so I just want it to be done. Let's just say that. This is a little bit stiffer of a pour. This is thanks to Bud Summers. I still got about a half of the Arbiter or Arbiter, or however you say it, 16.
Arberg?
No, it's got an L in it. I know that.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm drinking my Santori whiskey. This is the Toki, which isn't my favorite, but it's still very, very, very nice. For my family, we have all been ill. Pretty much all of my extended family, we've had like rounds of illness, this really nasty stomach bug going around. And we thought we were done with it. And then it came back into our house again.
No.
My brother-in-law got it. My nephew got it. And then we had nearly a week again. And then on Friday, Marie got it.
Welcome to the Midwest, by the way. There's something about the cold weather. It's a thing. It's a change. Honestly, I think there's actual reason behind the changing of seasons. So your body getting used to cold, dry, then it gets humid, and it starts to get different. I actually do think that makes a pretty big difference.
Well, Alexander has had it today. When I picked him up out of his crib this morning, he had a fever. So we've given him some medicine, and the fever's now gone, and he's happy again. And don't want to go near his diapers. Oh. So it's good to know that our lives have been parallel in that sense.
Yes.
But
hopefully yours is almost done too.
Oh, hopefully. I'm the only one that hasn't had it for a second time. My stomach's been a bit odd for the last day, so I'm hoping that's it. But let's talk about Ecumenism Month. Ecumenenenenism Month. What did you think?
First of all, loved it. Also glad we're doing this because I'm not sure I would have listened to all the episodes if it wasn't for this common room on it, and listened to them all in the last couple of days. I did listen to a couple of them prior to this, but then I listened to I think 3 in the last couple of days, and number of thoughts. First to you, well done on, I know you have a tendency to defend truth and to,
are you saying I'm argumentative?
No. There was that conversation, not in Ecumenism Month, but Ecumenism Month. But who was it with? You were talking about, it might have been in an apologetics one, but you're talking about the church fathers, and there was one church father that was quite combative for truth.
Tertullian, probably.
Maybe.
And Jerome. I mean, honestly, when you read the fathers, some of them are quite cantankerous.
Yes. And I was like, see, David's got some good ground to stand on for wanting to make sure he defends truth aggressively. I like it. But you did a phenomenal job with these I know there's tons of different things in there you probably had a different view with than them, but you just gave them the space and had an inquisitive mind, and never once came across the other way, and you asked good questions. It was also really fascinating to hear how subtly a number of them like to own Lewis for their denomination, which
everybody does.
It's interesting. You don't really see that until you have people back to back from different denominations. And hey, we're guilty of it too. We've tried to create and had people on from the Catholic side. We've had people from I think that's what's so powerful about Lewis actually is no one really can, but you all can create somewhat of an argument if you really want to. And so I thought that was
the strongest argument for Anglicanism. Then you can truly own Lewis legitimately.
Yes. So that was definitely something that came to my mind. In terms of who I really enjoyed, the Orthodox one, Greek Orthodox. She did a great job just telling her story. You could tell she was very intentional with her journey. her why for the decisions she makes, which I guess is just another way of saying very intentional with her decisions, came through and challenged me a little bit. Now, I have that very close friend in Chicago who was in Israel studying the difference between Catholicism and Greek Orthodoxy, and almost became a priest, now kind of somewhat considering Greek Orthodoxy. And so like the difference is it's definitely, they're close, and obviously I yield towards the Catholic side from a Bayesian perspective. If you were to lay out all the arguments, what do I think is most probabilistic, but I don't think it's like 90-10 or something. Like there's definitely valid arguments the other way. And hearing her made me kind of like, huh, yeah. So that one really, I was very impressed, and she made me want to be a little bit more open to not necessarily exploring becoming that, but reading some more works from there. And yeah, and you did a great job. I was impressed with your ability to, that was just the last one I've listened to was not Bruce Wilson, but the other Wilson, the first one, Pastor Wilson. Bruce Wilson was the LDS. The other
Douglas.
One.
Douglas Wilson.
Yes, Douglas. And I was amazed by how well you knew the different denominations. You know, that came across as being able to speak to them and to theirs, and the differences between Lewis and them. It's like you already kind of had a pretty good idea of that stuff. I would never have been able to know that kind of stuff.
Well, having gone on a bit of a ecclesiastical journey myself, it's exposed me to more denominations than perhaps your average Catholic. And also, I've really been on a Calvinism kick recently. For the last 6 months or so, I seem to be surrounded by Presbyterians and Calvinists at every turn. And so I kind of wanted to dig a little bit deeper into Calvinism and just try and wrap my head around how the system works from within. And so I've been reading more Presbyterian and Reformed authors than usual. And I had also then just read 2 of Pastor Wilson's books, because not only did I read his book about Lewis specifically, he had another book called What I Learned in Narnia. And I might get him on next season to talk about that as well. So I've been swimming in Reformed waters quite a bit recently. So it's reassuring I at least sounded like I knew what I was talking about.
You did. In my only 2 encounters with Calvinists, one, it actually worked in the space that I work in. And so he used to come in and love to have conversations with me on free will specifically. And and then
what you should have said is when he came into your office for the umpteenth time to talk about this, it's like, you really can't help yourself. No, really, under your situation, you cannot help yourself.
It was interesting to hear him argue that Lewis was close to Calvinism. The other one was this person over dinner time. I went to a dinner with like 4 different friends, and a PhD, like Calvinist scholar that goes on debates was there, and really created this deep philosophical argument for how we don't have free will, but we still are morally culpable. And a lot of fancy philosophical terms that were just way over my head. So those are my only experiences with those.
On that one, they're typically called compatibilists. So the idea is, broadly speaking, that you are freely choosing, but your desires are ultimately preset for you. So it's an idea of trying to reconcile free will and God's sovereignty in the sense of him determining it.
I feel like I could get behind the idea that maybe partial free will. Like a lot of times what we do in the moment is driven by repeated habits and stuff from a year ago, 2 years ago, outside desires, circumstances. There is a lot of stuff that makes like genuine 100% free will. Where like in this moment, I can always choose what I fully, truly want and know is best for me. It's like, no, I can't. It's a lot of built up stuff. But I do believe if you were to step outside over the point that brought you to here, the little decisions, you do have enough free will to claim that you have agency over your life. But I also do believe in the moment, it's not like perfect free will. If I had to just give my own personal experience, like I do believe.
It's Lewis that's making you say that. I also think because it's true.
Oh, is it?
It's heavenly and hellish creatures. It's the small actions compounding over time. If you think about the Great Divorce, when MacDonald is asking, is she a grumbler or a grumble? Basically, how much of this woman is left it might start with a small decision, but over time, sort of like, I guess you could compare it to alcoholism or drugs. There is a free will choice earlier on, but then when you're several years deep, your ability to choose the good and resist the bad is incredibly hampered. Still, perhaps not impossible, but yeah. All right, cool. So that was the Douglas Wilson one. That one was fun. I've actually just been going through a book where he wrote the foreword to it. It was by Christiana Hale. I'd actually previously interviewed her about her book about the Ransom trilogy, and so I was just going through it again, and yeah, some good stuff there. All right, what about the others? So we've covered the Eastern Orthodox, we've covered the Reformed. What did you make of the LDS interview?
The first half, surprisingly, I don't know if he didn't get. I don't know as much about LDS, other than maybe some more just surface level stereotypes.
What you've seen on South Park?
I've never seen South Park.
Oh, okay, then. That's most people's introduction.
Although I saw the Book of Mormon, the play, and that was like, it's supposed to be a super funny play. Terrible. I was like, that's not that funny.
I really hated it.
And not even for like, you can argue the whole like kind of quote unquote making fun of religion. I know Mormonism has really leaned into it in a good sense, and it's meant to be humor. But I was like, this isn't even funny to me. But anyways, setting that aside, I didn't realize like it didn't sound that different the first half. I think the part that was interesting to me was more the God outside of time versus in. And so it started making me think of, when we get to Apologetics Month, some of those arguments for the existence of God, how they handle that if he's not. In fairness, I was running at this point, so some things kind of I wasn't fully 100% engaged, but it seemed like he's more like a personal in time, but maybe a little bit of out time. But then he said something about some of the elements go back into eternity, but then is there something still beyond that? That to me seemed like it would be. Now I know he didn't dive into it, and / I was half listening, but can you stay consistent with the existence of God from a philosophical argument under that framework? That's the one thing that was going through my brain. I'd be curious your thoughts.
I think it gets harder. I think it gets much harder. And I think as soon as you depart from classical theism in general, it gets harder to be systematic, I think, consistently. But with regards to Mormonism, very often it can sound very similar. But as I ask one or two clarifying questions, you start seeing that the shade of meaning that's being attached to something is different. So he mentioned theosis. And so their conception of theosis is definitely beyond what you would see in Athanasius or Irenaeus or Catholic or Orthodox authors today. You might still use the same term, but it seems to be going beyond that, as well as the idea. And this is the other thing I find is sometimes it's kind of, it's unclear as to what actually counts as Mormon doctrine, what they actually have to hold to, such as the idea that God was basically a man once, and then he progressed to godhood, and that is what we're going to do as well, which I also think causes an infinite regress and all kinds of issues.
So that real quick, I'm understand. So was he a God fully before, then fully became man, or he wasn't beforehand and then just was maybe some sort of, what was he before? Let me just ask it that way.
The line, I'm going to butcher it again, but it was something along the lines of, as you now are, God once was, as God now is, you someday shall be.
Okay. But then how do they think of the original, the creator, pre-Jesus?
Well, that also gets a little bit more complicated, particularly if you have other things eternal that are not God. I haven't looked at Mormonism that deeply, but like I say, the main thing that I took away when I never encountered Mormons until I came to the United States. So then I think I read, the Dummy's Guide to Mormonism or something like that. And I found lots of those kinds of things where the original statement is just like, oh, that's just like regular Christianity that I would recognize. But then you peel back and actually the meaning behind it is different. So when they're talking about, there being one God, well, it's one God for us, not necessarily one God in the entire universe. But I would like to have him back because also he was in South America we didn't have a great internet connection. So that's why there was a change in quality as the episode went on.
That was the one. Yes.
But I hope to have him back on at some point. We will pick a couple of other topics, because he sent me some of his other stuff that he's written about Lewis, and so we might focus on like a smaller issue, and we'll do a slightly deeper dive to try and understand his doctrine, his understanding. But I always find it really interesting to see what people like about Lewis, and that was the sorts of questions I asked were broadly similar across each of them, though they tailored as the conversation went on. But so many of the things that I find that Mormons love about Lewis, it seems to be a little bit more of a rejection of some of the key Reformation ideas, such as the relationship between faith and works. It's not the same as, I would say, Orthodoxy or Catholicism, but I think they recognize it as closer. But
we definitely...
Sorry, go on.
You definitely had the thing that jumped out to me. Now, maybe it's because of the recent ones I listened to, so you remember the last ones, but it seemed like the way that Lewis made righteousness desirable, that what different language for some of them, but that seemed to be probably the biggest commonality. And that was my story. I mean, I never actually said it that beautifully, but remember, I always said, I don't know if this is true, but dang, that looks like the way to live. Yeah. And that was literally what brought me to exploring Christianity. Was Lewis made it look like you will find happiness and joy by living that life. And for many people, I think, in life who aren't following a way like that, probably are feeling an emptiness and a desire for more and more and more in this rat race. And then when you start reading something like that, it's like, huh. And so, yeah, that was a very common theme, and I could relate to it from my own personal story.
And what's your favorite book? The Great Divorce. And I would say that's the one that shows us what sin looks like. It's not good. It's empty. It's not something that you would ever desire for yourself. And of the glimpses that we get of glory, of Sarah Smith and some of the people that come down from the mountain, that's really attractive. And I'd say that's really difficult to do. Anybody that's ever read Dante, at least most of the people that I know who've read Dante, they said that they found heaven, paradise, harder to read, because I think it's genuinely harder to communicate goodness. It's the same reason why Lewis himself didn't produce the angelic version of the Screwtape Letters. He said it's just got to drip with heaven. And he says, who could possibly do that? Well, Jack, I think you could. Now try harder.
So with the remaining time now, how about you talk about your experience from interviewing them? So what were you going in expecting? Were there some parts where, I don't want to give you the stage and necessarily start countering, because that's not fair when the other person's not here, but like, what were some parts that, I don't know, your experience from it? I'm trying to like give you a chance to talk a little bit about it, but I don't want you to be like, oh, this person was wrong, this person was right. You can't do that when they're not here.
No, I think the thing that struck me was they were all very enjoyable.
Yeah.
You know, when Dr. Humphrey, the Eastern Orthodox professor, was speaking, theologically, we are so close, it is untrue.
Yes. And
particularly from my Eastern Catholicism background, she's basically speaking the same language, apart from that bit about the Pope. But aside from that, but that was, it was really...
That was super interesting hearing her talk about it. And that's the part that I want to explore a little bit more, how you had the different 5 cities or something, then Rome decided to break off in it. It really sounded like, and I'm not saying one way or the other whether she's right or wrong per se, I've never really explored it, like these 4 stayed, then we did our own thing, and eventually led to a schism. Because of course, from our perspective, you kind of see that was the one that goes back, and then the others started to maybe deviate. But it was fascinating to hear the reverse of that in very just rational and sexual, and it's something I definitely want to dive into a little more.
Well, if you want to dive into that, my main recommendation is actually another YouTube channel called Reason and Theology with Michael Lofton. I helped them set up their podcast feed back in the early days, but he spends a lot of time doing dialogues with Eastern Orthodoxy and Catholicism and looking at the very specific claims of Catholicism with regards to the papacy and the magisterium. But back to your question. So yes, so that one was delightful. And same with Pastor Wilson. It's really clear. It's really clear that he loves Lewis. And when you meet somebody who loves somebody that you love, it's like charity just starts flowing far more easily. Because, you can't help but think in your mind, well, he loves Lewis, can't be all bad. And I would say that was true for all of them. And there was
a smack or two.
Well, and there was yeah, and there's a bit of contention there between Dr. Flowers, because he critiqued some of Pastor Wilson's assertions about Lewis and Calvinism.
Which one was Dr. Flowers, real quick? I remember
he was the Baptist.
Baptist, yep, I remember that one.
If you look on the webpage, he actually even devoted one of his whole podcast episodes looking at Pastor Wilson's claims about finding tulip in Narnia, the core Calvinistic doctrines. But even despite all of that, the fact that they all love Lewis just it helps us have, I think, better conversations, and also seeing what it is about Lewis that they love. And the fact that Lewis manages to achieve it. The fact that Lewis can describe a doctrine in his own way. And you can have Christians from all different denominations just, sagely nodding their head. It's kind of like whenever we talk about purgatory, I will always go to Lewis to explain it. Because I think he explains it in a way that is not traditionally Catholic, not traditionally Orthodox. And I think because of that, he gets a fairer hearing. And I think all of us, whether it's in terms of apologetics or evangelism or just ecumenism, that we can take a leaf out of Lewis's book and try and freshen up our language a little bit, so that we're not bringing the same terms that are, for want of a better word, triggering to other people. That to try and explain a doctrine imaginatively, to give people something to hold on to, rather than simply a dry doctrine to either assert or deny.
It is, now that you say that, it is really amazing to think that he not only could do that for a bunch of Christian denominations, but the Jewish individual that came on, a person who doesn't believe so Jesus Christ. Oh yeah, I mean, he's super charitable, compassionate type person too. So that was nice. But
again, this is the sort of person that Lewis attracts.
Yes,
he attracts good people.
That's true. It really does. I mean, if you think of, we have the blessing of probably interviewing, I don't know what, 50 different Lewis scholars, probably between you, probably 40 of them, me 10, over all these years, and I have never come across one that hasn't been charitable, kind, jovial, open. I mean, it's incredible, actually, how awesome they are. Yeah, but the fact that someone who doesn't believe in Jesus Christ still finds Lewis so informative, to me, is absolutely incredible.
And he had some really interesting takes on some of his works. The stuff that he said about Till We Have Faces, I just thought, oh my goodness, Andrew is going to love and hate this.
You have to be sure to send any of the ones on the, I can't remember which one. There was one that I was listening to, and I was like, oh, Andrew's going to love that comment. I don't remember which one it was, so classic.
But it's the other thing I would say overall, looking back on it, it's really interesting to see the way that people look at Lewis, the spectacles that they look at him through, and how that can inform your understanding of somebody in terms of how you're looking at it will prompt the sort of questions that you ask. I just released the episode with Dr. West about Lewis and scientism. And he was talking there about how our scientific models, how we conceptualize the world, will very much prompt different sorts of questions. So if we are viewing the universe as blind and mechanistic, we might look at a whole load of junk DNA and assume, oh, this is just vestigial DNA, effectively doesn't really do anything. Whereas if you view the universe as essentially ordered and there being a mind behind it, and you come across this DNA that you can't explain, you're more likely to ask the question, well, if it's not doing what I think it's doing, i.e. building proteins, what is this stuff here for? Because you're assuming a purpose. And I think it's sort of similar more broadly when you come to Lewis. The theological framework you bring to him will somewhat shape the questions that you ask and the things that you appreciate and like. And hopefully out of the entire Ecumenism Month, people would have had a chance to hear people express that. So some parts of Lewis's writings that you didn't really appreciate because your tradition doesn't emphasize that so much. And so my big hope out of all of it was that people end up with a bigger Lewis at the end of it.
I never thought of it that way, because I the sacramental side of the Catholic faith, and a couple of the more sacramental religions too will understand this, is a lot of what I have related to with Lewis and the whole theosis. I argue the Great Divorce is a very sacramental piece of work, and I don't think it's a coincidence that I come from more of a sacramental background, and that's the part of Lewis that I have really appreciated. And that's also why I probably loved Dr. Humphrey, because she mentioned a book. I actually put it in my queue to buy from Amazon on the sacramental life, more or less. And I'm just constantly fascinated with how people apply, because whenever you think of sacraments, you think of the 7 sacraments, and you don't really understand that that's like a piece of a sacramental worldview that just sees the material world as important in our relation with it. And the more I hear people talk about it, the more I feel like it is an under-discussed concept. It is just such a beautiful way to view the world, and I'm yet to come across a comprehensive book that maybe popularizes that idea. There might be some, and that's why I wrote hers down. There might be some really good ones that do it, but I'm just waiting for one that really popularizes such a beautiful worldview.
We did have one person on the show. Was it this season? Was it last season? It was talking about Lewis's work as being pre-evangelism, and he spends at least a chapter in that book talking about a sacramental worldview and what that means. And I've recently had a few conversations with different Christians where you see a sort of latent Gnosticism in their thinking, that spirit is good, body is bad. You know, heaven is good, earth is icky. Yes. And that's not historic Christianity, and it's definitely not Lewis, because he saw the goodness in it all. And this is one of the reasons why we quite often share a little beverage as we're talking. We're enjoying God's good things, but in the right way, because even good things can be perverted or twisted.
That fire analogy by one of the people that you interviewed, I don't remember who said it, but it was definitely the Presbyterian or Southern Baptist, who with because said he enjoys alcohol from time to time, doesn't bring it with his kids, uses the analogy of a fire. And a fire, when it's in the pit, warming you up isn't its right thing. But if this thing gets out of that, so essentially uncontained energy, uncontained desire, think of our own with alcohol or any of these things, when they're in the proper place, they're okay. But when they get out, they're bad. I thought it was a beautiful analogy for just desires with boundaries versus desires uncontained or unconstrained, and the difference between it. I really like that analogy. I was like, I must steal that.
That was Dr. Flowers. And I actually first heard that comparison from Archbishop Fulton Sheen, when he was specifically talking about sexual desire. It's like, it's good. It's excellent when it's in its right place.
Yes.
And in the classical world, they gave the example of the charioteer, that there is prudence that is reining in the passions. And when you have a driver of the charioteer, then you can go in the right direction. But if there's no driver, the horses will just go crazy and it'll weave all over the place uncontrolled.
Chesterton's is the soccer game on top of the mountain, with fences versus non-fences. Football. You're probably right. Actually, you're 100% right.
We're at about the half-hour mark, so we should wrap it up. But this has been fun, a fun debrief. It was doing this month. Part of me was a little bit nervous about it, and I definitely have had messages from some people saying, "How dare you invite on such and such a person? Such and such a person isn't a Christian, etc., etc." Rather missing the point that as a Catholic, I'm actually not going to agree with any of these people, but I still think that they have some important stuff to share, and it would be a good idea to talk to them and listen. And that was sort of how I would just like to wrap up Ecumenenenenism Month. Just by saying that I hope people could listen with an open mind and get some value out of hearing somebody from a very different point of view talk about somebody that we all love.
And I'm glad you got those messages, because I'm sorry if I got those messages. How can we live in a world where people can't talk with people with different views? And I understand if you have a platform, but I'm still a believer in if you have a platform, you can still have these conversations and be open to them. I mean, I think there's nothing wrong with that. And the best way to develop relationships with people, and then hopefully if you have people that you want to come closer to your side with truth, is you need to understand their side first. Mm-hmm. So until you truly understand another side and humanize the other side and understand it, I'm not trying to say that people that we talk to are the other side. We're not like us versus them kind of thing, but just using that language here. It's like that would bug me. I'm not sure I would have responded as charitably as however you did. Like, you can't talk to people with a different view.
It's unfortunately the world that we live in. And
yes. So great work. And I'm looking forward to Apologetics Month as this goes out. That's starting.
Yes. I think all of them are recorded apart from the Victor Reppert interview on the argument from reason, which I'm kind of scared about because he's kind of the big deal. And I've read his book now. I was
scared for Trent Horn. I was genuinely intimidated by Trent Horn, actually.
Good.
It was a combination of half intimidation of him and half of just the topic itself, because you know that it's not one that I'm first of all just not super well versed in it. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with it, but it's not because I've studied it for 100 hours and came to a conclusion. It was because it wasn't that important to me in my faith journey. There's 1,000 other reasons why I'm Christian and believe God exists, and my surface level did not agree with the argument from morality. But Trent did soften me up a good bit with it, and it was really helpful to be able to understand the different parts of it. And so I appreciate that.
I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah.
Well, viewers, please join us next month when we will have another common room. Hopefully we'll have Andrew back with us, and we'll go further up.
And further in.
Cheers.
Cheers.